Welcome back to the Loose Framing Podcast. For another episode, I'm Tyler Martinovich, Film Commissioner for Hillsborough County, and to my right is...
Jesse Brock.
Hey, Jesse, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. I'm really excited for our guest today.
Yeah, we have a really great guest today. We have John Lux, the Executive Director of Film Florida. Just a wonderful human being, but also one of the biggest advocates in the state for films and
Yes.
film incentives and really all things film and digital media.
It's just he's a great communicator, and he really does a great job at conveying his message for the film industry in Florida, and he's just a great storyteller.
He is a great storyteller. I think part of his past is the reason why he's a great storyteller. So he just didn't magically become the director of Film Florida. He actually started out working for Disney back in the day, which is a really exciting story that we get into on the interview. But didn't you want to work for Disney at one point?
I did. So for those of you that know me, that was my original goal. Was I wanted to be a publicist for either Disney Animation or the Disney parks. So like everyone who's coming out of high school and wants to work for Disney, I did the Disney College program. And it was interesting. It was not as magical behind the scenes, I learned, which I think a lot of people learn. But it's something that, like, if you put Disney on your resume, people know you went through it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think that John Lux does an amazing job of sort of explaining his start there to when he transitioned to his own startup outside of Disney, but still working on that backlot. And you'll just have to tune in and listen.
Yeah. So
it's a great story.
You dumped your pixie dust out and settled for working for me. So
hey,
I see how
all
it is.
roads led to Film Tampa Bay, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, thank you for the plug. So with that, everybody, we're going to turn it back over in just a second to John Lux for a great interview. Thanks for watching. Welcome back, everybody, to the Loose Framing Podcast. Joining me now is Executive Director of Film Florida, John Lux. How are you, John?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making the drive over from Orlando today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk about all things Film Florida here in a second, but you have a really cool background and a cool story. How does someone who grew up in Chi-Town come to Florida? Do you just get sick of the miserable winters?
Well, in short, probably, yeah. I mean, I love the Chicago area. Born and raised there. But, in late 90s, I think I had gotten a little over the winters. There's nothing like a Chicago summer, but the winters were a little tough. And a couple things kind of came together personally, and I think the thing that kind of pushed me over the edge was my job at the time was usually about a 15-20 minute drive, and no expressways or anything, just basically all side streets to get to the company I was working for. And we had a snowstorm in March, and it took me an hour and a half to get home. And I just kind of said, like, I've had enough. And at the time, I was 23 years old. My then girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I both kind of figured, look, we're young. We don't have a house. We don't have kids. We're just kind of starting the career. Let's see how it works in Florida. And I've now lived in Florida longer than I lived in Illinois, which is hard to believe. I still consider the Chicago area my home. Even though this is where I've lived most of my life now. And but a lot of things came together. It was the right time. I was at the right place at the right time to get an opportunity. And I remember when we came down here, it was like, let's give it 6 months. Let's see. And 6 months has turned into 23 plus years now.
Well, I'm sitting on, I think, 12 now, so I'm on that same course. So you weren't just birthed as the executive director of Film Florida. No. You had a long, circuitous path to get there. It wasn't just the great weather that brought you down to Florida. So what was your first production job that actually led you here?
Well, it wasn't a specific one. It was, at the time, back in the late 90s, there wasn't a whole lot of production in the Chicago area. It was a corporate town, a lot of commercials, a lot of ad agencies are up in Chicago. But the thought of coming down to, at that time, one of the top film and television destinations was really appealing. And so I remember sending back from my AOL email address on dial-up, doing all kinds of research, trying to find all the different production companies that were in Central Florida, because we had friends that had recently moved, so that kind of seemed like the home base. and sending resumes. I think I sent over 50 resumes at different places. A couple of them responded. Most of them didn't. It was funny, a year or two after I moved, kind of looking back at that file to see where I sent them and saying, oh, so, now that I know these people, oh, you were the people that didn't even acknowledge my email. Okay, great. But I got lucky, and I still have the original email when I was hired from Disney, and the operations manager at the time sent me an email and said, if you make your way down here, we think we can keep you busy for a while. And honestly, I didn't know what a while meant. I didn't want to ask because I needed to justify moving.
Yeah.
And so if a while was 2 months, well, then I would figure it out after then. If a while was, 5 years, we'll figure it out after then. But it was enough for me to kind of justify moving down here at the time. And I guess the rest is kind of history.
Yeah. Now, it's not everyone's dream to work for a mega corporation necessarily, but I have to imagine anyone who's just even mildly interested in film entertainment would just be thrilled at the idea that someone is iconic as Disney might want their skill set. So how was that working for them?
Yeah, it was a tremendous learning experience. My first day on the job was the day before Disney's Animal Kingdom opened. And I remember standing in the back of the machine room because we had, at that time, there was 5 or 6 edit suites packed round the clock. Audio suites were booked with all the different content that was being created for the opening of Animal Kingdom. And news stations in and out all the time. There was an uplink station, which at the time was the way you got, from footage from point A to point B was a satellite. And I remember standing in the back of the machine room, and the guy who was training me was just running ragged all over the place and didn't really have time to even deal with me at the time. And I just remember standing in back against the wall and thinking to myself, oh my God, what did I get myself into? But it was really cool. I mean, the first couple months that I was in Florida, Animal Kingdom opened, Disney Cruise Line launched. It was the year after that was the Disney MGM Studios, at the time, the name, their 10th anniversary, I believe it was. And so there was a lot of really neat things going on. And I remember from about June of 1998 through the end of 2001, I was working on some form of television show almost every single day from a post-production standpoint. And there was all kinds of them. I mean, we did stuff for Animal Planet. We did stuff for ESPN. We were doing stuff for Columbia TriStar Television, Odyssey Network. We had all kinds of television series. So it was, I actually didn't even know what I was really getting myself into. The truth is, when I took the job, I just took a job because it was my ticket to move.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got down here and in the first couple of months that I actually figured out what I was hired to do. But I loved it. I loved there was nothing like, there's nothing like episodic television. I love it because there's air dates, mm-hmm. and when things have to end, as opposed to an independent film or a feature film, which you have a schedule, but it's just kind of a schedule. Yeah. Television is real, and air dates are real, and delivery dates are mandatory, and live television is even more of a rush. I remember working on, I don't remember whether it was the Rosie O'Donnell show or the Wayne Brady show, one of those talk shows, and they were filming in Disney, and we were actually editing the second half of the show while we were uplinking the first half of the show. And it was my job at the commercial break halfway through to make sure I hit the button for the uplink at the right time, literally frame accurate, to make sure that the uplink went from the first half to the second half, which we had just finished. And I was just the post-production assistant at the time. And the rush of live television, episodic television, there's nothing like it. Yeah. And so I always I always go back to television as kind of the first love.
So I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you're like me, where you might have been on a film set or two and realized very quickly that I would rather be anywhere than actually on a film set.
Exactly.
So I also had a bent towards editing, and then location management, production management, producing. And you had a similar career course. So you went from a post-production assistant to being a vice president at one point. So talk us through that, because that's going to lead us into Film Florida.
Yeah. So God bless Y2K. and for those that are too young to actually know what that is. So there was the big panic going from 1999 to 2000 that, computers were going to implode. And we had a system that tracked invoicing and clients and our entire tape library at the time was in a system called Zymox. I have no idea why I remember the name, but I do. But it was not Y2K compatible. And so about halfway through 1999, we were introduced to this new system. And I was the post-production assistant. I was the vault guy. But the tape vault was one of the most concerning things, was how were we going to get all of this data from this system that isn't Y2K compatible into this new system. And so they gave me 10 floppy disks that I could install on the computer to use the trial version of this new system. And I installed it, and I learned it. I learned it frontwards and backwards, upside down. I figured out all the different ways you could change fields, and I became the kind of the new system, which was called Schedule All, the Schedule All guru around the organization. And so the finance person was coming to me asking, how am I going to send invoices? And the scheduling person was coming to me about, how am I going to schedule the edit bays and all these. And I literally learned the operation by learning the new system. And so it was at that time that I actually realized I love post-production, but I couldn't see myself doing it for the next 40 years. Yeah. And so I moved into the operation side. And really the first 6 months of the year 2000, I didn't really have a job other than train people on the new system and figure out how we were going to operate a division of the Walt Disney Company and this brand new system. And that's really where I started learning about, operations and finance and all of these different things that my family were accountants. Some of my family was accountants. So when I was in college, I took economics classes and I took finance and management and accounting classes, but it was really just to make sure they didn't disown me.
Yeah.
And now here I was in my career actually remembering credits and debits and all these different economic terms and all these different things that I needed to know to train people on this new system. And so that moved into later on in 2000, we found out that the division of Disney was going to leave the company. And we were going to go independent. And our then vice president was Bob Allen, and he was going to buy the division and we were going to go independent. And a number of people that were kind of above me in the operations chain decided they were Disney lifers, and they wanted to stay with Disney. They didn't want to go with this new independent startup. And so it was one of those where people kind of looked around the table and said, well, we don't really have an operations guy, so do you want to do it? And I was like, sure, all right. So here I was, 3 years after, not even 3 years after moving to Florida and being the post-production assistant, I'm the operations manager of a startup that happens to be on the back lot of the Disney MGM studios and has major television series in the building at the time. And so I got a crash course on what it meant to be an operations manager and all of these things. And it was one of those things of like, I was at the right place at the right time. And I was just hoping not to screw it up. But it was really interesting at the time. I learned even more because we left Disney where, the mouse paid us and the mouse sent invoices, and I didn't even know how people paid anything. all of a sudden we were a startup and we had to figure out, I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours formatting an invoice template to make sure that the address would be in the right window when we would mail it. Like, we had to send an invoice. We had never done that in our life. We didn't know how we were going to get paychecks.
Yeah.
And so all these things about running a business were all just kind of thrown on top of all of us. And, you know, we just kind of had to figure it out on the fly, because we literally went home on a Friday afternoon, went to the Disney Casting Center, turned in our blue and yellow IDs that we all had as cast members, got a green ID to get us in the gate because our building was still in the same place, but signed resignation papers. We were no longer Disney cast members, but then we went back to work on Monday morning in the same building with the same people doing the same exact thing, except now we were a brand new company on day one. And so and we had television series in the building. So there was no learning curve. It was a matter of, like, our clients didn't care that we were a startup. They wanted to make sure their products were getting out. So it was an amazing learning experience. And I feel like I aged like 10 years just in that 6 months of trying to figure it out. And that kind of led to, you know, I was with that organization, whether it was part of Disney or independently, for 18 years until I kind of fell into the Film Florida role.
Yeah. I think that the story you just told, there's people listening right now who have their own startup production companies who are going through the same thing. You know, you were a crew member yesterday and today, now all of a sudden you've got to realize, well, do I have location releases? Where's my form? All the stuff that goes into actually producing a commercial or a TV show, that's all on your back now. So yeah. I appreciate you sharing that story. So what year did you actually join Film Florida?
Well, I got involved with Film Florida in 2013, but I didn't officially join until 2014. I got roped into checking people in at a legislative function at the Grand Floridian in, I think it was September of 2013. And the reason I got roped into it is because a colleague of mine was on the board of Women in Film and Television, and Film Florida and Women in Film and Television were putting together these legislative events all over the state. And as my kids call her, Auntie Shirley, couldn't do the reception and came to me and said, well, like, you do more of this than I do, really. So do you want to go and help? And so I volunteered. And I checked in a bunch of people. It actually really helped me, because when you're checking people in, you can put names with faces.
Yeah.
And so I started kind of connecting some dots. And then about halfway through, Leah Sokolowski, who was the president of Film Florida at the time, basically said, like, nobody else is showing up. Do you want to go sit in? And I went in and I sat in, and I was riveted about the conversation. And from that, I remember Senator Alan Hayes, who was a senator from, I believe, Lake County. And he got up and said, you know, I love the film industry. And he talked about how important it was. And this was, you know, I was still in the learning process. I didn't realize that not everybody liked our industry. You know, I didn't understand that. And he said, you guys aren't telling your story well. You need to tell your story better. And that was exactly what my boss, Bob Allen, always talked about, was telling your story. Your story is being told all the time. If you're not the one telling it, it's most likely being told wrong. And so I thought, well, I'm gonna tell my own story. So I went back to the studio and recorded a video about why it was important to me and my company that the film industry be supported. And I had really never, ever been on camera at that point. Hated to hear myself even on the answering machine. But I figured, look, if it's not me, somebody's, you know, who else is going to do it? You know, it's up to me. And so I did it, and I put the video out on YouTube, and I was impressed that, like, it got like 1,000 views. And, you know, other than on-camera actors and actresses ridiculing me because I'm not an actor, it was pretty well received. And then at the beginning of 2014, I was contacted because Film Florida needed some help with their social media strategy, and they wanted my input. And I sat on a call, and it was a little scattered. And I said, look, rather than me explain to you what you need to do, just let me do it. Just give me your passwords. Trust me. I'll get permission. I won't blow anything up. And they kind of handed over the keys to me. And then it was pretty apparent that it was kind of inappropriate for the organization to hand over the keys to the social media channels to a guy that wasn't even part of the organization.
Yeah.
So I went to my boss. I went to Bob and said, look, we need to join. And he was like, yeah, of course, absolutely join. And so we joined. And so, and then a couple months later, they asked if I wanted to be on the board of directors. And I actually ended up jumping right into the executive board. Again, right place at the right time. The treasurer at the time was Jennifer Paramore from St. Pete Clearwater, and she was retiring. And so I was like, well, yeah, I know finance. I kind of know QuickBooks. I'll do it. And I kind of filled a role, even though it was kind of odd for somebody to go from like barely a member to the executive board. But it was a need, and it was kind of like, it just kind of worked out. And then, so I was on the executive board as a volunteer member starting in 2014. And kind of just, so I really blame, Leah Sokolowski for dragging me into all of this and Michelle Hillary. And actually even before then was, somebody I still call my big sister, Jennifer Pennypacker, who was the president of, Film Florida before I was even part of the organization. But she was always kind of the mentor to me about what's going on in the film and television industry.
So I joined the Film Commission in September of 2013 as well.
Okay.
And I think the first actual event I went to was the event in Orlando. I don't remember if I met you then.
I don't remember it. I don't think so.
But I do know that I knew you when you were still with Ideas, because I'm very lazy with my email, and I've yet to delete your old account. So half the time when I'm auto typing in John Lux, it still comes up as Ideas, and I have to.
Yeah, don't send to that email.
No, I always catch myself, but at some point I'm going to remove that. So let's do the audience a service here by actually formally introducing Film Florida, because we're going to be talking about that for the rest of the podcast. So give us the elevator pitch of what Film Florida as an organization is.
Okay, so Film Florida has been around since the late 90s, about 22 years, and it is a statewide not-for-profit. So it's a trade association, and it's a membership-based organization that represents all aspects of the film and television industry in Florida, and digital media as well, and pretty much any form of production. The definition of what our industry is has gotten very broad and very vague over the years, and that's great. So we have it's a membership-based organization. We have members from Pensacola to Key West, literally tip to tip, and we have members that are students. Colleges and universities, primarily industry professionals and companies that work in the industry, a number of local film commissions, a couple of labor unions, a lot of film festivals from here in the state of Florida. And then we have kind of this miscellaneous hodgepodge of people that maybe they're in tourism, maybe they're in real estate, maybe they're just lawyers, but they support the industry and they see the value of the industry and they want to be part of what our organization is. And so, the membership continues to grow, and we're really happy about that.
Yeah. So, you mentioned earlier on one of the reasons that brought you to Florida was, at the time, Florida was a huge production hub.
Yep.
Right place, right time. That led you to being the executive director of Film Florida. But when you moved here, we were one of the top 3 production companies in the United States.
Right.
It's easy to be the executive director of an organization when the cotton's high, right? Where there's productions coming in, everything's green. But when you came in as the executive director, was right at the tail end of our incentive program at the state level. And within a couple of years, we dropped from the top 3 to top 10, top 20, and now we're not in the top 20 at all.
Right.
Right place, right time. We needed someone that could actually tell our story effectively to try to gain the support that we had lost. What was some of the immediate challenges when you came in as the executive director?
Well, from a legislative perspective and the incentive discussion, we were toxic as an industry. I mean, we were just flat out toxic. It was hard to get a conversation with a legislator. Even if they supported us, they kind of had to do it in the closet. We had been, by a couple of legislators that for whatever reason, we had been branded as an industry that is bad for Florida. It's bad for an ROI, for a return on investment. It's bad for the image. And it really, it stuck. It really stuck. And so it was difficult going from, I still remember when that incentive program was passed in 2010 and there was euphoria. The company I was working for at the time was in the middle of a $1 million investment into a state-of-the-art post-production audio room. And our goal was to mix television and film for years. For a lot of different reasons, that room doesn't exist anymore. I don't work for that company anymore. The company's not in that building anymore. And that's one of many stories. And so when I came into Film Florida, there was a part of me that was excited about kind of the blank slate, but it was also a really challenging time because not only did we no longer have this incentive program, but there were people out there that were trying to harm us as an industry. Like, it's not bad enough that you don't support. Like, you either support or you don't support. That's fine. But there were people that were actively trying to harm us as an industry. And so it really was just playing defense more than anything. Like, we couldn't even truly tell the story of the industry because we were too busy kind of protecting ourselves from the rocks being thrown at us. Yeah. And so it was definitely an interesting time. But baby steps, that was really kind of the thing, is that we knew where we were at. We knew what our opposition was. And so there was a long-term play, and nobody that works day to day in the industry out in the field wants to hear about a long-term play. They want to know, what are we doing tomorrow to pay the bills? And so there was definitely angst, but you got to be realistic. And at that time, knowing how a lot of the legislature felt about our industry completely incorrectly, it was the reality. Perception is reality. And so our first job was to try and turn that perception from such a negative place where it was into a positive place. We forget about getting legislation passed at that time. We couldn't even get in the door. And so it was about figuring out what is that long-term play to get us from literally being toxic as an industry to where we are now, which is not where we want to be, but at least we know that we have great support in a lot of places, and we continue to grow in the right places to get to where we hopefully want to be.
So, I mentioned earlier, Florida was one of the top 3 production hubs in the United States. I think it would be hard for anyone to argue film and entertainment wasn't part of the DNA that makes Florida what it is. You look back to the 10s, teens, and 20s, and Jacksonville was one of the first epicenters of filming on the East Coast. Right. You look at what film did to transform Miami. Miami's always been a big city, but it gave Miami an identity it didn't have before Miami Vice.
Yep.
Walt Disney, Universal, it is as part of Florida as oranges and beaches are.
Yep.
So how do we go from the euphoria of 2010 to a narrative being presented, or at least believed by some of the legislature, that we are somehow a toxic element? How did the narrative get so crooked so quickly?
Well, there were a couple of things. First, the old incentive program, you got to remember when it was put in place. It was designed in 2009, 2010. And at that time, the economy was in utter shambles. People were being laid off left and right. The housing market was crashing. There wasn't a pandemic that was causing it. It was natural. Some would argue man-made, but in terms of the economy, it was a natural thing that was happening. And so that program, when it was put in place, there were 2 main goals. It was get projects here to Florida to spend money in our economy, and make sure they hire our residents. From those metrics, the program worked. The problem was about halfway through the program, Governor Scott brought in an economist that had a return on investment formula. And there's a lot of different elements to the formula, but basically what it measures is if the state is putting in a single dollar, how much state tax revenue is it getting back? It doesn't take into account local taxes, doesn't take into account tourism revenue that's generated from that dollar, from our industry, just purely what is that $1 putting in and what is the state getting back? And from that measure, the old program failed. And when that ROI metric came out in 2014, it was early in 2013, 14. It was early in my time, but I remember everybody in our organization screaming from the rooftops, let us fix it. The rules have changed. Let us fix it. We know how to fix it. It wasn't politically advantageous for some people to let us fix it. It was more advantageous for them to kick us while we were down and point to us and say, number one, look, all incentives are bad. And number two, this industry's bad. And so that was kind of the mindset. And even though you're 100% correct, our industry is part of the fabric of Florida. Literally, Miami and South Florida is Miami Vice. That's the identity of South Florida. Miami Heat still wears jerseys now. Their special jerseys are called Vice. Come on. But it had gotten that bad. And, if we were given the opportunity to fix the old program, we knew how to fix it. We weren't given the opportunity. And so for a couple more years, we were kind of the punching bag to say of the economic philosophy that says incentives are bad of all kind. This industry is bad ROI. We don't need it. At the same time, by 2014, 15, 16, the economy was doing very well in Florida. And so there was an element of the economy's fine. We don't need this. We don't need these people. We don't need this industry. We're fine. And so, and that has been a challenge leading up to the pandemic. That was a challenge for us in part of our discussion was getting legislators and the general public to believe that we could help when they look at the economy and say, what do we need you for? We're doing fine. But fine doesn't always mean it can't get better.
So I want to address real quickly, because you did bring up the fact that the economy did get better. Mm-hmm. It's even after the pandemic, I think Florida is one of the best situated states in the union as far as recovery goes.
Yep.
But there was also this fallacy out there that we don't need incentives because Florida is Florida and productions will still come to Florida whether we have incentives or not.
Right.
And that was categorically untrue. And we see that just in our ranking as far as production hubs goes. But just anecdotally, can you share some of the productions that immediately pulled up stakes and left?
Well, Ballers and Bloodline will always be the biggest examples. They both received funding from the previous incentive program. They were both at the very end. And leading up to the sunset of the old program, there were legislators that kept saying, they'll come back, they'll come back. These projects are only using us for the money. They'll keep coming to Florida because we're Florida. Well, Ballers and Bloodline were renewed for season 3. They were not going to get the incentive. And some of those same legislators screamed from the rooftops, see, I told you so, I told you so, pat themselves on the back. We were right. They're going to be back. Well, Ballers never filmed another second in the state of Florida. They completely rewrote the show, literally packed up the warehouse at night and moved out, never to be seen again in Florida. Changed the entire show they wrote it into the show that they were leaving Miami and they were going to the West Coast. Bloodline had been slated to do 6 seasons in the Keys, but you couldn't just pick up Bloodline and go somewhere else. The Keys were a character of the show. And so what they did was hastily put together a season 3. Instead of it being 13 episodes, it was 10 episodes. Those last 3 episodes were basically lopped off because that would have paid for from the incentive. Yep. And to this day, I still get comments on social media about how great season 1 and 2 of Bloodline was and how terrible season 3 was because they just tried to cram so much into that last season. Yeah. And then they canceled the show. So we would have had, even at a season 3, we were supposed to get another 3 seasons of Bloodline at $30 million of production spending per season. And Ballers went on another 3 seasons. They ended up doing 5 seasons out on the West Coast at least another $25 million per episode. So right there alone is $150 million that we literally gave away. Yeah. And those are always, and then we have a map. I mean, unfortunately, it's growing, called the Lost Business Map. We're up to, close to 100 film and television series that wanted to film in Florida that we just lost because we're at a competitive disadvantage. There's no two ways about it. And those projects would have spent more than $1.5 billion here in the state. They would have used more than 250,000 hotel room nights. 125,000 cast and crew jobs for Floridians. Those, our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, family members, neighbors, all those people would have been working in those projects. And we literally gave that money elsewhere. Yeah. And so as good as Florida's economy was before the pandemic and has now come back, you can always do better. I mean, Florida has some of the lowest wages in the country. The average annual wage of all jobs in our state is about $56,000 a year. The average wage for our industry is just shy of $90,000. So yeah, the economy's doing good, but wouldn't we want another couple $100,000, $90,000 a year jobs? I mean, doesn't that help the economy? Doesn't that help everything we're trying to accomplish here in the state? On top of diversifying, we at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody said we need to diversify. We can't be as dependent upon tourism. And everybody agreed on that. And then now that the economy is coming back, it seems like everybody is kind of fallen into the thing of, well, the economy's doing fine. We're good. Let's just move on. And there's another downturn at some point. I don't know if it's next year, 5 years, 10 years. God willing, there's no more, massive outbreaks in the pandemic, but we need to be prepared for that as a state. And the way you do that is to diversify. Anybody would tell you that. So, and that's where we think we can play a part of it.
So I think philosophically, someone can make the argument that incentives are either good or bad. But as far as the film industry goes, that Pandora's box was open in the 80s with different countries starting to try to lure productions away from the U.S.
Right.
And at this point, it has been so ingrained in just the basic day-to-day functions of film sets and film financing that there is no way to go back. And this is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. Some of the most incentivized states in the union are heavily Republican-held Congresses and legislatures. So let's tackle the real world right now. The previous program didn't score well. So in the years we've had since the sunsetting of our projects, what has Film Florida done to promote a bill or legislation that does meet the metrics as set by the state?
Right. So first thing is understand what went wrong in the old program. You can't fix something if you don't know what the problem is. So we learned that it was a little over aggressive. Florida has a lot to offer film and television producers. And so while we have to be in the game in terms of offering something, we don't have to be as aggressive as some of the other states because we have other things to offer. And you put that puzzle together and that makes a good package when somebody's looking to come here. So we first of all learned what wasn't working well. We studied other states to see what is working in those states. And then we spent a decent amount of time focusing on the states that don't have a state income tax because, it's a great benefit for those of us that work here that we don't pay state income taxes, but it is a severe detriment to our industry in trying to advocate for a new program because we don't have a state income tax. Yeah. And in short, if the state is paying an incentive in an industry that is primarily labor, which is what we are, and none of that labor is then kind of helping recoup some of those costs, it makes it very difficult to get that ROI where it needs to be. So we spent a lot of time kind of tinkering with things and knowing how to help that formula. So, the program that we are working very closely with Senator Joe Gruters, Representative Dana Trabulsi, who, by the way, are both Republicans, is a fiscally conservative program. It's not as aggressive as some other states, which some people look at and say, well, why are you even bothering if you're not going to? You need to know your limitations. And our limitations here in Florida is that we have to meet that ROI requirement. And so the program that we've been working on will attract $5 to $25 million budgets. It's not going to attract a $100 million budget. You can't be all things to all people. And if we put forth a program that doesn't hit the ROI mark, we set our industry back another 10 years because you're going to have to go through that whole thing fighting that ROI argument. So what we know for sure is that ROI is not an issue in our program. We have scaled it back a little bit. We've made we've narrowed what is eligible. But we know from experience that if people want to come to Florida to film, and the only thing holding them back is that we can't dangle that little bit of a program, we've checked that box. They will be here. If a project is looking for the biggest and best incentive program, then we're not it. And that's okay. What we want is the projects that want to come to Florida because they're going to have a vested interest in our success because we have a vested interest in their success. And there will be no shortage of projects that want to come here. Like, I don't want to hear, well, you're still going to lose projects. We're always going to lose projects because we can't be unlimited. What we want is the projects that are good for the state of Florida, good for our industry, good for our workers, and are going to help the ROI because without an ROI, it doesn't matter what the program is.
I mean, just anecdotally, look at the Tampa Bay area. We're blessed to have an incentive program between the two counties, two of only 6 counties in the state that has that. And even though we're only offering a infinitesimally small carrot compared to something like a Georgia or Louisiana could, we're still reaping the benefits from these smaller productions that honestly would not have even considered our area had we not offered something to attract them here.
Right.
Right now, while we're recording this, we have 5 different features that are either shooting or in pre-production and will be shooting within the next couple of months, one of which was supposed to shoot in Fiji.
Right.
But it's coming here instead because we're giving them something.
And anybody that says that you don't need an incentive is just not accurate. It's just 100% false. And what the local incentives are proving is exactly what our argument is, that if you give them a little bit of an incentive, you will get projects. And so you take the 5 that you're talking about. I don't know this, but I'm just guessing that those budgets are less than $2 million. Well, so a small incentive is impactful to that less than $2 million budget. If you just raise the bar a little bit, give them a little bit more of an incentive, you're going to take that $2 million budget and you're going to be in the market for that $10 million budget. And that expands the project base that we can attract a lot more. And so that, some people would say, well, what do you need an incentive for? The Bay Area's got these 5 films. Well, you're actually proving the point that we do need the incentive. If we know your audience. The local incentives are perfect for the $0 to $2 million budgets. That's perfect. We want to get to that $5 to $25 million budget. So you have to have a little bit more. And that's where the statewide resources come into play.
So this episode is airing in January. If I'm listening to this, you should be a Film Florida member, and we'll get to plugging that here in a second.
Thank you very much.
But what can I do as just a crew person or a production company when I agree that we do need incentives and I want to participate in the discussion?
Yeah. Well, besides joining Film Florida, which we'll get to, you need to engage. Going back to my story back in 2013, like I didn't wait around. Prior to that, honestly, I always assumed, well, I don't really need to get involved. Somebody else is doing it. We are the somebody else's. There is no big company doing this for us. Film Florida is a volunteer-based organization. I'm the executive director. I'm the only one that is actually full-time with the organization. Everybody else is a volunteer. So if you're going to sit at home and say, I don't really need to do it, somebody else is doing it. Who is the somebody else?
Yeah.
The somebody else that is going to do it is the same industry professional as you are. And so if everybody had that attitude, we'd never make any progress. So people need to contact their legislators. It sounds cliche. Nobody really likes that that's the best way to do it. But the best way to do it is to attach your personal story to your name to the legislator. And the way you do that is you reach out to them either by email, or whether you want to make a phone call, or you set up a face-to-face meeting. In 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I had over 125 meetings with legislators, never left my house. I did every single one of them on Zoom, a couple of phone calls from people that weren't that comfortable with Zoom at the time, but every single one of them was virtual. So you can send emails, you can do these meetings in person or virtually, and you don't need to talk about the details of an incentive program. You just need to tell a legislator, here's my name, here's what I do in the industry, and this is why I need your help. A lot of people have lost business. A lot of people have had to move. A lot of people have lost friends and relatives because they've moved to other states. A lot of people have had to take other jobs outside their career to pay the bills. There's a lot of the worst stories that I hear are people that say, my husband and I both work in the industry, my husband or wife we both work in the industry. One of us has to travel almost 10 months a year, which means our little kids are basically being raised in single parent households. That stinks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that way. So I always encourage people, if they don't know who their legislators are, because it's a kind of a spider web to try and get in that, reach out to me directly. You can go to our website. The email on our website goes right into my inbox. You can call me or email me and send me your home address. I look it up. I find out who your state senator is, who your state rep is. I'll send you the contact information, and I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. I'll let you know this one already supports us. Just thank them for their support. Positive reinforcement is important. Or this one doesn't support us. Here's the type of story that would be impactful. Or maybe it's, we're not really sure where this one is. So reach out to them and get some feedback and let us know, because we the more information we have, the better we can be at being effective.
Yeah. Well, that's all great tips. Let's bend the conversation a little bit and end on a happy note.
Okay.
We don't want to be all doom and gloom, because I think there's a lot of positive things that are happening in the state, and certainly positive things that Film Florida does. So talk us through a little bit about what Film Florida actually does during the year and what the benefits of being a member are.
Okay. So yes, we've talked a lot about the incentive parts of things and kind of the legislative side, but it's really a very small portion of what we actually do. The core competency of the organization is marketing. We want to market the state of Florida to attract projects. We want to market our members because it's a way of us giving back. And I always say it's my job to tell the story of the industry. The best way to tell that story is through our member stories. What they're doing and what they do for a job, for a living, is the story of the industry. So I'm constantly promoting our members, telling their stories. They have special press releases, they have projects, they have announcements. We're constantly telling those stories from a marketing perspective. Our goal is always to help our members. So whether that's professional development, trying to have people on, whether it's our podcast or whether it's our Film Florida Friday series, trying to make sure that they can engage and gather as much information. We do as much networking as we can. It obviously has been challenging with the pandemic. It's also challenging that we're a statewide organization. When it comes to a networking thing, if you hold a function in Miami, you're ruling out about 90% of the industry. So we have gone to a lot more virtual things. And yes, it's not the same as having a face-to-face conversation in the same room, but our members have told us that they would rather have Zoom functions that they can join from anywhere in the state, as opposed to just being left out because they're not in a specific geographic location. So networking is important. The advocacy side, as we've talked about a lot. And then, it's a cliche, but working smarter, not harder. if you're an industry professional or a company, why do you want to reinvent the wheel when there's probably other people out there that have a lot of the knowledge that you need that you can just get? And it's not, yes, I guess technically some people are competition and they don't want to share all of that, but by and large, we're all trying to just make sure we can keep the lights on. And so people are really willing to share information, share best practices. You ask questions, you get answers. It's all these things about working, look, there's the old adage of like, if you wanted to play an individual sport, you'd be a golfer or a tennis player. There's a lot more people that want to be a player on the basketball team or the football team. Yeah. And that's what we have in our members. They want to be part of something bigger. We have a lot of members that have basically said, look, I know my voice is just one voice, but if I can lend my voice to Film Florida, I know it's a larger voice and a larger presence, and that's why it's important.
So this is our 6th episode of our podcast, but Film Florida's podcast has been going on for quite a while. I think you're on your 5th or 6th season now.
5th season, yes.
Over 100 episodes.
Close to that, yes.
So if you've enjoyed this conversation, you definitely should check out the Film Florida podcast. You've had some incredible guests over the years. Where can people hear your podcast?
They can go to our website and find the podcast, but I usually suggest people go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're on Stitcher. We're on iHeartRadio. We're actually on a couple other outlets that I don't even know about. I just kind of stumble upon them, but those are the 4 main ones. But you can always go to our website and find that information as well.
Oh, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Before we wrap up here, how can people become members of Film Florida?
They should go to filmflorida.org, and there's a tab on the homepage, talk about membership. We have memberships from student memberships all the way up through corporate memberships. So there's a lot of different levels and that fit everybody's budget. And our membership continues to grow, which we're really proud of. It shows that our members see value in what we're trying to accomplish. So go to the website and check it out.
You are very, very active on social media as well. In fact, if you're not posting once a day, it's multiple times a day, every day. How can people find you on social media? We are on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel that we post all of our videos. So yeah, when we are very active. I try and get stuff up there at least once a day, and in most cases, like you said, it's more than that. And it's Film Florida everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, Film Florida. You'll see our little icon logo in all the places. But yeah. All right. Well, John, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for having me, Tyler. And for those watching, we'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us through the outro. Hey, Jesse. Hi. That was a great interview. It was absolutely one of my favorites. I mean, we really kind of dived deep into what the incentive program was and how we can get it back and everything that went wrong and how we can move forward from it. It's just, I mean, it was sort of a primer for people who want to get engaged with legislation and understand the benefits of joining Film Florida, but also just how to be an advocate for the industry you work in. So I'm really glad that he brought up a lot of those topics and was as thorough as he was. So one of the questions that came up, though, during the interview was the idea that legislators basically said, we don't need an incentive because people will come to Florida anyway. The location sells itself. And that's honestly not true. But film tourism is a real thing. So it grinds my gears when we have a local story. For those who are not familiar with Tampa Bay, we have a wonderful downtown with a historic district called Ybor City. But we had a feature film that was literally written for Ybor City, about Ybor City. It was historic to our area. And it left. Yeah. It was the same author that wrote Mystic River. Yeah. I mean, it's one of my favorite books of all time. And when I read it, it goes from Boston to Ybor. Probably 2/3 of the book is in Ybor City and then down to Cuba. But I mean, Ybor City is so culturally rich, and we have such a long history of mafia in this town. Santo Trafficante Jr. is buried in the Italian cemetery just a block north of where, of 7th Avenue, of where this movie was supposed to take place. And because we lacked a film incentive to bring them here, they recreated Ybor City in Georgia. Yeah, in Brunswick, Georgia, which if you've ever been to Brunswick, Georgia, it does not look like Ybor City. So, and I think it really affects the movie. You can kind of tell. It does. It doesn't have the richness. Yeah. It looks like a movie as opposed to being on actual locations. Right. It's losing some of its grit, you know? Yeah. 100%. So in relation to that, we asked our social media audience what their favorite film tourism spots are. So what's some of the response?
We got 12 that I pulled, top 12. So the Rocky Steps in Philly is number 1.
Okay.
And then we had the Gazebo in Dirty Dancing, which I didn't realize that you could visit, but it is in Virginia, somewhere Virginia. And then the real life Whoville set at Universal Hollywood. I've actually been there too.
There's a Whoville set?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It's the real Whoville, and they keep it set up. And because Universal Hollywood is very different from Universal Florida, they still have an operating backlot. And so they actually have the set of, what's the movie with Bates Motel, the horror movie?
The Psycho?
Psycho.
Yeah.
And then they have a guy come out when you're on the backlot tram, and he comes out with the knife and he like chases your tram down. Well, they have the same thing, and it's interactive around Christmas time where the Grinch and the Who's in Whoville are in the actual set of Whoville while you're driving through. So,
well, that's...
Anyways, I love the Grinch, guys. It's awesome. And then the train from The Fugitive in North Carolina. I looked into that. The train's actually still set up, and they advertise it as such, as like, this is the train from The Fugitive with Harrison Ford. Someone said, I've driven by where they had the race in Greece in LA. And I had to look that up, but apparently it's a divot, and they've used it for multiple movies, but Greece is the first one they ever used it for. I sat on the Forrest Gump bench, which this is controversial between you and I. You don't think that exists?
That bench is not there anymore.
So I went to Savannah probably like 2 years ago. They had the actual, or 3 years ago, they had the actual bench in a museum, but then the park there is Chippewa Square, which is a square in Savannah. And they have a bench there so you can recreate the scene, but it's not the actual bench. Tampa Theater, where they filmed The Infiltrator. Shameless plug. And then the Exorcist Steps at Georgetown.
Yeah.
Universal Studios in California, their backlot. The house from Edward Scissorhands that recently got turned into a museum.
Which is here locally in Tampa Bay.
Yep, in Lutz, Florida, in a subdivision. So they recreated a lot of different moments from the movie, and they have like props, and different people are donating, fan art and stuff. It's a whole museum. And Chimney Rock from the scenes of The Last of the Mohicans.
Okay, that's a very diverse number of locations, and it's not the ones I was expecting either.
Right? What were you expecting?
Well, I mean, Back to the Future is a big one. The mall where the opening scene takes place is a huge mecca for film tourism. Miami at large for Miami Vice.
Yes.
Think of all of the locations from Star Wars. Return of the Jedi is in, I think it's in Washington, or it's somewhere in the Northwest.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, the trees where they're doing the speeders and the Ewoks and stuff.
I'm gonna add that on my list. I've seen Mrs. Doubtfire's house in person, and it was funny because I went like on a Monday at 8 a.m. I Ubered. I think in my Uber was like a kid on his way to school. But I just parked in front of it, or I got dropped off in front of it, and there was somebody in the top, like in the window. You could see them. So I like went up, and they came outside, and I was like, hey, are you guys doing a tour of the house? And they were like, no, we're trying to sell the house. They were realtors. So, but I did see it. But it was cute. It was, they had like a whole Robin Williams memorial set up outside. Yeah. It was very sweet.
Well, film tourism is real is the point of this. Both of the discussion I had with John, but also just asking our social media audience of places they remember or have visited and seen. And the idea that people don't travel to experience the movies that they've watched or enjoyed is just, it's insane. Look at Malta, which, it's a beautiful island, but the tourism that increased because of Game of Thrones was amazing. Look at all the locations from the history series Vikings that people are now constantly going to and seeing. There's an entire Vikings, the TV show museum in Ireland. This is an industry that handshakes so well with tourism. It's so important to local economies when a film shoot comes through, not only just for the money they're spending, but the long-term effects that tourism can have after they've left. And that's not just days, weeks. It could be decades later after a film stopped filming that people are still returning to that location to see it.
Yep. Some of those like Rocky. Rocky was what year?
70,
79, something like that.
78,
People
79.
are still going to those steps. I mean, that is a long-lasting, when you have an epic and you have it on location, that's a long-lasting impact to that location.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to ramble too much, but I hope the audience
They get it.
And I hope they took away some really great information from listening to John. I couldn't give a better personal endorsement than the fact that we sing that we're members of Film Florida loud and proud every day.
Yes, we do.
And if you are a filmmaker within the state of Florida, there is no excuse for not joining Film Florida, being a member, and not just being a member, but engaging. Come to the networking events, be on one of the councils, voice your opinion, be part of the solution in making film a priority for the state of Florida. So with that, everybody, I want to thank you for tuning in. Once again, Happy New Year's to everyone. And we're thinking that 2022 is going to be another great year, and we certainly have more great episodes coming up. So Jesse, let's wrap things up. Where can people follow us?
People can follow us on social media at Film Tampa Bay, but be sure to listen or watch on YouTube Loose Framing Podcast on anywhere you listen to podcasts.
And with that, Happy New Year's, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.